Optimizing for capital growth, trusts are usually the best way.
We have a lot of very specific anti-avoidance laws. You can trigger one of those.
Could be something that will be not good.
Harry Dell, expert tax lawyer, founder of Cadena Legal, who you probably recognize from TikTok, walks us through a ton of the details rarely spoken about to minimize your tax, if you're interested in minimizing your tax.
Of course I am minimising my tax, and if anybody in this country doesn't minimise their tax, they want their heads rinsed.
Nowadays, it's un-Australian not to have a trust. 100A says if you have a reimbursement agreement, it ignores that distribution being made, and therefore the trust pays tax at 47%.
If you enter into a scheme, so doing something, and the sole or dominant purpose is to obtain a tax benefit, then that is tax avoidance.
As well as some of the details high-level investors know that can make a huge difference to your overall wealth.
And I wanted to use a little bit of my insider information here because I was at the ATO in 2017, 2018.
We've got a very active ATO that says, don't do this, don't do that. But when they take those matters to court, losing more than they should. If you're not feeling like you've been de-risked, then you should.
If you're interested in minimizing your tax and understanding the Australian tax law in a way that only very few of the wealthiest do, then you're in the right place. I'm Todd Sloan. This is the Pizza and Property Podcast, and you're listening to my chat with tax lawyer Harry Dell.
Harry Dell, it's time to talk tax, mate.
Let's do it, Todd.
Tax avoidance, tax minimisation. Can you explain to me the difference between the two and what people really need to know about it? More specifically, property investors.
Easy, I think. There's a third category, tax evasion, but we kind of know what that is, I think.
I'm going to kind of put that in like the brother and sister category to avoidance, but...
Avoidance. Let's start with avoidance.
Okay.
Let's start at the beginning. Start with minimisation. Minimisation is, within the rules, keeping your tax as low as possible by doing things allowable on law. And then let's go to the other end. Tax evasion is breaking the law. It might be like not lodging your tax returns. Like you have a legal requirement to do that. If you don't do that and you screw all the money away in the Cook Islands, which people have done in the past, then that's criminal level tax evasion. It's called defrauding the Commonwealth.
Right.
But in the middle there is that grey area about avoidance. And it's actually very hard to specifically go, this is avoidance, this is not. It's it when you see it.
Okay.
We have a lot of very specific anti-avoidance laws. And if you trigger one of those, you've attempted to commit avoidance. There's also the general anti-avoidance rule, which says if you enter into a scheme, so doing something, scheme could be very simple, like putting on my socks in the morning, and the sole or dominant purpose is to obtain a tax benefit, then that is tax avoidance. And that seems really low bar, doesn't it?
Yeah. Because what immediately comes to mind is the whole Jimmy Carr thing. I know it's Britain's not Australia, totally different tax system. But from what I understood, he didn't actually break any laws.
Yes.
But he got thrown under the bus massively.
Yes.
Is that the same kind of thing that technically it was legal,
Yes.
but it was avoidance?
Yes, that's right. So if somebody says to me that anti-avoidance laws apply, that says to me I've actually ticked all the boxes in terms of the pure legal requirements.
And if you didn't, then it would be evasion.
If I didn't, then it would be evasion, or it wouldn't work at all.
Right.
I'd be just not paying CGT when I should have, for instance. So it's very hard to describe, but you know it when you see it. And it's the Kerry Packer interview, and I think everybody should have seen it by now, where they say, Mr. Packer, you're going against the spirit of the law, and he laughs. There's no spirit in tax law. It's there for a purpose to raise revenue, and also to stop you doing a whole bunch of other things, which really money's the purpose of it. But he made a very good point, and that stuck with a lot of people, in that there isn't much spirit in the tax law. It's you tick this box, or you cross this box, or something else. It's not just, this is avoidance, this is not. If it was that easy, then the tax system wouldn't be 90,000 pages as it is, with all the other superfluous crap that's involved.
So, I'm going to do straight to the platitude.
Thank you.
So, as far as it being kind of grey then, how do people know? Like, could I be like committing tax avoidance right now?
Accidentally.
Thinking I'm doing a minimisation?
Oh, yeah. Like you can, but also the level can be so small that it's just mostly irrelevant. So there, like, for example, there is this thinking that you can claim $300 of expenses on your tax return. You just claim it.
Yeah.
Because if you read the ATO website too narrowly, that's kind of what it says, but it doesn't really say that. People claim it. Is that tax avoidance? Is that tax evasion? Is that criminal tax evasion? Because you're not entitled to that.
Okay.
It's like, well, no, because you're just being really dumb. And being ignorant, it's very hard to prove tax avoidance. And when I talk about entering into the scheme and for the sole or dominant purpose, that purpose thing, it's actually a really big problem. This is a really big technical issue, and we're getting really into the nitty-gritty stuff. So purpose for tax avoidance purposes is determined objectively by what you've done, not by what you thought you were doing, which is a bit of a mind bend, because the tax law is now saying, well, you've done these, 3 steps. Well, would a normal person in your circumstances have their purpose for doing that?
I think I understand what you mean. All right. So is that always like a manslaughter versus murder type thing of like, even if you didn't mean to do it versus you actually meant to do this?
Yeah, sort of.
Kind of.
Actually, no, it's a whole separate stream. It's what would a normal person have intended in doing this? Not what did you intend? Because when you talk murder and you talk about motive, you go, well, what was your relationship? What were you thinking? And they try and get to the mens rea, the mentality of like, well, why did you do the offence? But in this case, and this is a weird tax thing, you have to objectively go, well, what was this? What was the purpose? But purpose is inherently subjective. Because the purpose of you doing something is going to depend on a whole range of things. And it might just be that you made a dumb choice. And there are lots of people, and they used to say this, is they go, well, the purpose was, I had no idea what my purpose was because the accountant just told me to do it. Said you should just sign the tax return. You sign it. But really, what would a reasonable person making those deductions or claiming that exemption have intended? That's what the court's really asking. Because in every tax avoidance case, you would know that the taxpayer I use ironically because they didn't pay tax. The taxpayer will go to court, write an affidavit and say, I never intended, I didn't have a purpose of tax evasion, or avoidance. I had a purpose of something else. Purpose of evading family law obligations or something. But that's irrelevant. So you can't go up and say, well, here's what my purpose was. Irrelevant. The ATO will determine it objectively. And the more you think about that, the more that will bend your mind into how unreasonable that is to do.
Yeah. Okay, so my follow-up to that then is if someone's looking at something, go, cool, I can really minimize my tax by doing X, Y, Z under a property investing umbrella.
Yeah.
Negative gearing is always the one that comes to mind, but let's just say it doesn't matter. Like you're renovating a property and you're looking at it going, okay, this is going to be a huge cost base.
Yeah.
Whatever. Who do they need to be talking to, or what do they need to be looking up to go, am I clear here? Am I okay? Because from what I'm hearing, it's like it comes back to their intent, but then it doesn't as well. Harry, I'm
sorry. I threw you a doozy in the first question, but there is an exemption to this, and I think let's go all the way back around stuff. Yeah. If you have an ordinary family or commercial dealing, it's not covered by tax avoidance rules. It's not considered tax avoidance.
Okay, so me and my wife flipping a property or buying property,
ordinary commercial dealing. I would say, even family dealing. Using a family trust.
Yep.
It's un-Australian not to have a family trust. I tell people that's my favourite joke. Thank you. I love it. Splitting your income between your kids and, your father-in-law and whoever that you can to save a few dollars, like that's feels like ordinary family dealings. But as you get more refined and you get more strategic with it and start to push the boundaries, it starts to become not ordinary family dealings. And unfortunately, the enforcer of those rules don't really understand ordinary commercial or family dealings very well at all. And they've taken quite a few losses in the courts in the last 4 or 5 years, which is a bit unheard of. So we've got a very active ATO that says, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. But when they take those matters to court, they're losing more than they should. They should have a pretty high success rate, and historically they did. They would say in litigation a 95% win rate. That includes all the debt cases. They're super easy to win. Very hard to list a debt case as the ATO. But even on their contentious litigation, they would win. But in the last 4 or 5 years, they've been losing. And this is the Section 100A stuff with family trust. This is, Part 4A. That's the general anti-avoidance rules. That's stuff with property. That's all sorts of very specific rules where ATO used to have a very good understanding, but I find it to be slipping and wanting in recent years.
All right. If we were to wrap this question up then, because you're right, it's a tricky one. If someone finds themselves in a position thinking, I might be in trouble here, what should they be doing? Are they getting a letter from the ATO? Is this a case of like talk to a tax lawyer, go to your accountant? What's the first step?
That's the case where you should talk to a tax lawyer. If you talk to you should talk to your accountant first about it, because your accountant will likely work with a tax lawyer. If they're good, they'll work with me, but not always.
Not a paper.
There are other tax lawyers that are good. I'll admit. I like to describe it's accountants, tax lawyers. There's not this clear dichotomy. I do some stuff, they do some stuff, I do. That's fine. But accountants are more like GPs. And GPs can have specialties. They can have areas of interest. And some of them are really good at property. Some of them are really good at tax evasion or whatever. But they're doing a lot of tax return compliance work. And then when that really nitty-gritty issue comes up, the tax lawyers, we do it every day. We're not distracted by 1,000 client groups and getting the compliance done. We just do edgy stuff.
Yep.
And de-risking people and finding solutions or engaging with the ATO, whatever it is. So when it gets serious enough, your accountant should know, let's get external advice. And that's part of the requirements under the Tax Practitioner Board rules. But if you are concerned that what you're doing is a bit too artificial and contrived, and that's a very loaded term, then you talk to a specialist yourself. Most specialists will have a look at your case and go, well, is there a serious problem here?
Can I just start by talking to your accountant?
Yeah.
If you get somewhere there, great. Follow that path if it feels like the right path.
If you're not feeling like you've been de-risked, or you can't get an acceptable explanation, then you should push it further because you are responsible. Even if the accountant tells you to do it, mate, you're the one paying tax. And there's the recent case with EY and the Billabong founder where he got found of doing a tax avoidance scheme on EY's advice, and he's now suing EY for millions of dollars. And it's actually not clear whether he will win that one. It hasn't quite been heard yet, the damages, because he's responsible for signing it. You need to understand what you're doing, which is very loaded because you pay a professional to understand it for you.
Yeah, completely. Could you imagine like that in the medical field? It's like, you're never going to understand how heart replacement works or something like anything technical.
But the surgeon should say to you, you've got a 80% chance of dying on the table. And that's like what you need to know. And then if something goes wrong, you can't go, I wasn't told that my heart valve would blow up. It's like, well, as an advisor, whether you're an accountant or a lawyer or tax lawyer, whatever, you've got to be able to convey the risk-reward ratio effectively. Say, if we're taking a lot of risk for a very small return, I'm going to say to you, that's not commercially a good move anyway. There's nothing wrong with the risk as long as it comes with acceptable reward and an informed client. And if you don't know, if you have a concern, it means you haven't been informed enough and you should go back to your advisor.
One of the questions I'm actually looking forward to unpacking with you later on around the 3 different categories of risk. But we'll get to that because I'm jumping ahead. But just to make sure I understood you right, basically it is a confusing subject. So just in case you're listening right now thinking, I'm not 100% following this either, that's okay. Neither am I.
Neither am I, frankly. It's I don't know every tax law.
Yep.
Any accountant or lawyer that says they do is full of crap. So
okay,
it's.
I feel the same thing when people say they know where interest rates are going. It's like no, you don't know.
One of them might have a crystal ball, Todd. So
maybe. Anyway. Getting on to trusts. Now, family trusts, basically buying property in trust, big thing in the property investing space. Well, what is Section 100A when discussing family trusts and distributions more specifically to them? And what do property investors need to be aware of?
For a bit of context, it's been around, I think it was 1981 that rule came in.
So it was arguably one of Australia's favourite prime ministers, John Howard, as treasurer. And in the 80s, it was the golden age of tax evasion. It was great. They would do all sorts of stuff. And they had this particular scheme called trust stripping, where you would strip assets out of a trust by doing certain things. And we didn't have CGT back then. We just had income tax. So you could do all sorts of capital gains stuff and not pay any tax. And that's what the ATO was really throwing things at. And Treasury made Section 100A to say, don't do trust stripping. And in the explanatory material, it even said, if you find a way around this, we will change it retrospectively and get you anyway. So it was pretty scary law. And there's a whole lot of tax laws just like this, which are don't do this thing. And no one ever advises on them. You just don't do that thing. Okay. There's lots of examples, commercial debt forgiveness stuff, value shifting, really weird rules. And most advisors won't even come across them apart from saying, you just don't go there. The rules are just such a pain that you just don't do it.
Just avoid it completely.
So trust stripping was dead.
Yep.
Hallelujah. Great. And then we came into it was around 2017. And I want to use a little bit of my insider information here because I was at the ATO in 2017, 2018. And there started to be murmurs about using Section 100A, which said if you make a trust distribution to a beneficiary and there is something called a reimbursement agreement, either explicit or implied, a reimbursement agreement isn't I'm going to reimburse the trust, but it could be that I'm made entitled to the trust distribution and I pay the tax and then I give it to Todd.
Following?
Even though it's really Todd that controls the trust and I pay the tax.
Yep.
So 100A says if you have a reimbursement agreement, it ignores that distribution being made and therefore the trust pays tax at 47%.
Okay.
That's what the trust does on undistributed income, which is why your accountant will say you need to distribute trust income every year. Because if you don't, you pay 47%. Nobody actually pays that. That's dumb.
Yep. It's the whole reason you got to trust.
That's right.
Yep.
You distribute it to a company at a minimum. Otherwise, you don't pay 47%. So 100A, reimbursement agreement, the ATO started to catch on and say, well, we can just apply this to trusts doing kind of regular stuff. So
when you said the ATO started to catch on, this is what we're talking about now recently it coming to light or back in the 80s?
No, this is recently. This is recent.
Yeah.
So like 100A never got used really. There's like 2 or 3 cases and then everyone's just like, don't do it. All right, guys, leave it alone. And then mid to 2010s, it started to go, well, we can actually, like this is a really good compliance tool. This has very broad scope and effect and we can use it in this way. And they ran a few cases in the last few years and they've been less successful than you'd think. Because if I have a trust, and I don't want to get too far into trust taxation because like it will put you straight to sleep. But
I can tell a lot of people are leaning in right now.
Leaning in. Tell me more about trust taxation, Harrison. Yeah. So trust taxation, you go, how much accounting income did I make?
Yep.
And how much taxable income? Usually they're similar.
Okay. But
taxable income will include sometimes things like capital gains, whereas accounting income is just income. When you make a distribution from a trust, say the trust had $10 of accounting income and had $100 of taxable income that it puts on the tax return. Because it may be that some deductions were denied or something like that. Okay. And then it says, hey, in my trust resolution on 30 June that I do at midnight every year, never late, of course, it says, Todd, I'm giving you $10 of accounting income. You are presently entitled. It goes to you.
Thank you.
You then pay tax on $100. You don't even have $100.
I got $10.
You got $10. You can't even pay the $30, $40 in tax, which is a bit of a problem. But that's how it works. And we didn't even know that until 2012.
But that's how it's worked since the 80s from what Howard did when he was treasurer.
That's how it worked since 1936, even prior to that.
Right, okay.
Trust taxation has been broken in this country since it came in. And this rule, they only go, oh, we can like maybe fix some stuff with it. And they're not winning those cases. So trusts are more complex than I think the ordinary Australian appreciates.
Absolutely.
And will cause them issues if they're not doing things in quite a vanilla way.
All right, so what should people be doing or who should they be talking to then to get advice that actually is going to help minimize tax, not evade tax, but minimize it using a trust, still having a bit of that asset protection side of things with a trust as well when it comes to property investing?
Well, the good news is there's still test cases hunting around. The ordinary property investor isn't going to run into this problem in reality.
Define ordinary, because a lot of our viewers have got 3, 4, 5, some have got 10, 20.
Like ordinary, I'd say renting some properties out, maybe even the odd development.
Okay. Nothing
too crazy. Look, if you've got 100 mil of property and you're going to develop it and build some skyscrapers, like
you're in a different category.
You should be getting some tax lawyers involved and you're going to be looked at because of the ATO compliance programs on people with more assets. But if you're the ordinary property investor, say less than 10 mil of gross property assets, not including debt, I wouldn't be too worried about it unless you're doing silly things with your trust. If your trust is 50% to wife, 50% to husband, it's not too contentious. They're all in the same bank account. Don't worry about it. If you're starting to use your adult children, that's when you need to be really careful because, little, son number 1 or daughter, you distribute them $120,000, your great property empire that you've built over many, many years, but they don't ever see it. It never even goes on their bank account. And there's two problems here. One's tax. You give them 120, on paper, and it actually goes to mum and dad, and they buy more stuff. And maybe the child lives at home, and they go, it all equals out. It doesn't. So if you're going to make someone entitled to a distribution from a trust, they are actually entitled to it. And this is the other problem in that at law, if I'm the kid and I go, well, mum and dad said I'm entitled to 120 grand. Where's my 120 grand?
Technically, you can sue mum and dad.
And that has happened.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. So there is a double-edged sword to it. If you get too cheeky and start really splitting it up too much, you're going to run into these, you're going to reduce your asset protection because you start to create other risks. And this is where tax starts to be balanced. And unless you're going to actually give that person the money.
So if you actually do, though, it's kosher, it's fine?
Yes. If you actually do, and there was no reimbursement agreement at the time, such as you can have a reimbursement agreement after the fact, such as you can give the kid 120 grand, and that the kid can go, well, give it to mum and dad, they've helped me out, that's fine. If that was the understanding at the time of the distribution, this is where it's very grey. This is why people are rightfully concerned of it's so suspect and grey that it's very hard to go, I'm safe and I'm not. But if they do, 120 grand and then gift it back to mum and dad after the fact, technically they're fine. And there are some strategies that people are running. Accountants have spent a lot of time studying this, it's been a hot topic. And it's about doing those things after the fact, of making the distribution in cash if you can, and then dealing with it later. But dealing with it just in the accounts and then just sending it to mum and dad is higher risk. There is an exemption to this.
What's that?
Ordinary family and commercial dealings. And there have been some cases on this, and they didn't really get to the point. The court's a bit frustrating sometimes, in that the ATO ran these cases to get a bit of guidance, to get a bit of clarity, and then the court says, got out of it another way. Some other thing don't have to consider this. And then they don't answer the real question that the ATO wanted to answer. They didn't really want to prosecute this guy or this girl, but they wanted to get clarity in how it worked. But the court just gets around it, so they're a bit cheeky like that. But 120 grand to kid number one, give it back to mum and dad. Is that an ordinary family dealing? Is that something that everyone down the pub's going to be doing?
Probably not.
That's kind of the argument, in that it's not really ordinary. Is it an ordinary commercial dealing to be gifting property, gifting money with nothing in return? Not really either.
Is this when we start getting into the definition of the word ordinary?
Yeah, and we don't know what it means. And it changes over time. Ordinary family dealings 50 years ago, we didn't all have trusts 50 years ago. It was very different. It was very much wealthy people had trusts and most people didn't even care about it. Nowadays, it's un-Australian not to have a trust. I'll get this tattooed, I think, one day. It's un-Australian not to. It's, you chuck your property in there, chuck your stocks in there, whatever else. And, doing those sorts of annual distributions, it happens a lot. But is that enough to make it ordinary? The ordinary person with a trust, the ordinary reason you get one is income splitting. It's a tax benefit, mostly, and a bit of an asset protection benefit. But largely, it's a tax benefit, especially in the beginning. I'm going to set up a trust and buy some rental properties and split the income and all good.
So what I'm hearing is don't stop using trusts. It's not about trusts are bad now, but it's just about you need to be very aware of how you're distributing this income and that you're going to be looked at closer than you were a few years ago. Is that that's a real loose summation, but...
Yeah, it is. It's trusts are complex vehicles. But as long as you don't do anything too silly, unlikely to be a problem.
Okay.
The ordinary property investor shouldn't have an issue with this. If you're being cheeky, particularly if you're doing complex developments and you're splitting income and you've got lots of entities, that's when you start to look at this as a real issue every year. But if you've got one trust, maybe two, and a bucket company, it's unlikely to be a large risk. But I would keep an eye on this area because it's still developing. This is 40-year-old law that nobody ever really enforced. And the ATO suddenly got excited about it. Here we are.
That blows my mind. That this has just been the way it is, but no one talks about it.
Yeah.
It's...
Oh, and actually the worst bit of 100A is normally they have a period of review, which is usually maximum 4 years. For Section 100A, it's unlimited. They can go back to the 90s, the 80s.
Well, now you just scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I told you everything was all right, and then I just pounced. So,
okay. Yes. I have to ask now. So that if someone's looking at this going, Jesus, well, I've got 5 kids. I distributed 100 grand to all of them every year. Like I've been doing this.
Yeah.
Again, call the accountant, call the tax lawyer.
Yeah. If it's 100 grand every year for 5-10 years, like, yeah, you're talking $5 million, $10 million now. It's adding up.
Yeah.
It's time to get a bit of advice and de-risk. And sometimes that advice is actually more, we need to protect your assets in different ways. Because if the ATO is going to raise a debt, then that's the issue that we have to face. If it's unlikely, then really it's just positioning. It's like, well, how can we de-risk you? How can we document this better? And the advice isn't, pay the tax lawyer, a crap load of money and everything's all good. The advice is real advice. Is like, well, yeah, this is cooked. Here are things we can do. And sometimes it's not good news. Sometimes it's like, you can't do much about this. At least stop doing it in the future. Sometimes people don't like that advice, but that's the best we can do.
If that's what it is, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Better than hearing BS.
Yeah, it's a scary provision, but it shouldn't keep you up at night unless you're being too cheeky. If you're being cheeky, then you should give me a call and we'll talk about it.
3 questions every property investor should ask their accountant to know if they're in the right hands or in dodgy hands. And the reason I want to know this one is because I know some very good accountants now. Prior to making this podcast, I didn't. And one of the things that frustrated me is everyone would say, get a good accountant, get a good accountant. Every accountant says they're a good accountant.
Oh, yeah.
What should you, as a tax lawyer, and the little peek behind the curtain that you get, like you said, the worlds kind of collide a little bit. There's a bit of overlap. What 3 questions would you be asking from a property investing perspective?
Who their most complex client is. Because you want your accountant, not their identity, but you want your accountant to be able to deal with you as you grow. You can go to an accountant and all they will do for you is your tax return and your rental schedule, and maybe your stock distribution. But you want to know that they've got, one big hitter, or they've gone in with the ATO and they've had to defend somebody. There are a growing number of accountants that don't do that. And that's fine. That's the service that they offer, is the compliance service. That's what you pay for. But the question is, the underhanded question is, can you advise me for the next 10 years?
Gotcha. Yep. As I grow, can I grow with you?
Because, you don't want to grow to $1 million in wealth. If you're doing property investing seriously and making those picks and those bets on different places, then you want to get an outsized return. You want to be worth $10-20 million in all that time, and you want an accountant that you can stick with. Changing every couple of years, you don't want to do.
Why?
Because then you've got to redo everything. You're going to get new ideas. You're going to have to recalibrate that accountant. You're going to get risk because they're not going to know what the accountant 3 years ago did. Especially if you're 2 accountants. If you go to 3 accountants, the first one's not going to know. So the third one's not going to know what the first one did. So you need to find a trusted advisor. And for some clients, it's me. I'm not accessible to everybody, and I know that. And that's why part of the reason I make a lot of content is there are people that want my help and frankly can't afford it, and it's not worth my time to do it either. But if I can make a bit of educational content and get that exposure for myself and it helps them and a few other people, like, that's cool. But accountants should be able to advise you for a very long time and their fees will go up. So know that they have clients more complex than you.
Okay.
And that includes, clients that die and they've got to help them with their wills, because some accountants, people die all the time. If you've got a diverse client group with lots of property, someone's going to die. Someone's going to, help the widow with, or the widower with figuring out the trust and where everything is and where all the loan documents are. They've got to be taking a positive step on that and not just doing a tax return.
Kind of feels like the same kind of thing around like growing as a person mindset as well. It's like if you're the smartest guy in the room, so to speak, it's like find a different room.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You want your accountant and your advisors to be smarter than you in the areas that you're not.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, sorry.
No, keep going.
What's the next question someone should be asking?
The second question that you should really ask them is, have you ever had to defend an ATO audit? Because property is front of mind and has been for a long time. If they've never dealt with the ATO checking in on rental schedules, even something basic, then they might be very new to it. And that's fine. If they can be honest with you and say, I haven't had to do that yet, that's probably a good sign. If they say, I've had to do that, I know how to deal with the ATO, know how to get the professionals in, then that's good as well. If they go, I've never done it, I don't really want to help with that, I just want to do compliance, that's when you need to know what you're paying for. If you're paying for someone to just do your tax return, that's great, but you need to be paying for that trusted advisor. And that comes at a bit of a higher price tag, but in the long term, it's always worth it.
Well, I guess this is the difference between buying a property and being like, cool, that's our goal, we're content, and trying to build a portfolio.
Yeah.
If you're really trying to grow to something spectacular, you need a spectacular team around you.
Yeah, you just got to bring in the right team for the right stuff. And that probably brings to the third one is you should ask them if they have a network of professionals. And not every accountant will have a tax lawyer that they work with very closely. My door's always open. I've got a whole bunch of accountants, and my policy with them is they can generally give me a call or flick me an email, and I'll give them an off-the-cuff answer. They need to have usually a tax lawyer, a financial planner, even a mortgage broker, all sorts of people that they can introduce you to and say, well, these are people that I know are good. And there's a whole bunch of ways for them to get them. If they're a bit too conflicted, that's a bit of an issue. So they should have more than one. So they need to have a good network of professionals. And which is why it's good for professionals to have accountants in their network, because they refer a lot of work. So historically, I used to get a lot of work from accountants, and it's kind of flipped around with the social media stuff. And then I get a lot of direct work, which is great because I get to send them to good accountants. So that, I see a lot of benefit from people saying, can you lodge my tax return? And I go, no, I'm a bloody lawyer, mate. I can't even count. Here's an accountant that I know is good and will suit you. That, I get a lot of value from doing that. And accountants should be wanting to bring value to their network and introduce you to the right people, not just to whoever gives them a commission or something like that.
I actually thought you were an accountant the very first time I saw you on TikTok.
It says tax lawyer in the
I read it and I found out afterwards, but I was like, oh, this accountant's really good. I'm like, wait a second, he's not an accountant.
Yeah. That is so common. I should change it to
Not
tax lawyer Harry Dell or something. People still miss it, so that's all right. I don't take it personally.
So the three questions someone should be asking. First of all, who's your most complex client? Like you said, you don't need all the details of them personally, but you need to know that they're dealing in those kind of upper echelons.
Yeah, they've got to have some big dogs on the book.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever actually defended in court in the ATO?
No, not in court, just an audit.
Just an audit. Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever defended an audit? And do you have a network of professionals around you?
Yeah, because I think the language and you need to say about building a property portfolio is you don't want to buy a lot of property. You want to make a lot of money. That might mean, through property ownership and sale, they've got to be able to take you through that whole process, not just buy a lot of property and then, you want to sell one, I don't know what to do. You want a will, I don't know who to go to for that. You want to be able to go, yeah, there's a lawyer that does property stuff. He can do your will for you, even for your trust and all that crap. That's fine. They want to be able to introduce you to all of that and the whole process, because again, you don't want to change all the time. You shouldn't be chasing the cheapest deal. Accountants are notoriously bad at charging for their time, so make sure you pay the bills on time. This is for my accountants. I hope your clients pay your bills on time, and whatever you charge them, be willing to pay for advice. If you've got to take a couple of hours on the phone with them, then they should charge you for that. The package I've got with my accountant, for instance, it's all inclusive, and I pay a bit of a premium for that, and I can call him up and say, got to sort some crap out.
I got the same deal,
which is great.
Yep. Because
they don't have to worry about keeping timesheets and things like that, which is what they want to do, and it's predictable for me. I'm not going to get bill shock, which is excellent. Other accountants will charge by the hour, because that's when some accountants actually do a lot of advice work. Like some of the stuff I do for property, there are accountants just as good doing the advice just as good, and they will charge you for that at rates that will make people's eyes bleed. But it's very worth it, that sort of stuff.
Again, you're going to build something big, don't cheap out.
Yeah. And they're going to go, you don't need it yet. If they're good, they're going to go, you don't need this stuff yet. And they should be able to tell you why.
I like that.
Yeah.
Some investors purchase a PPR and then quietly rent it out on the side. Can you explain what a 353 notice is and why the ATO might ask someone's lender for one?
So there's two kinds of 353 actions that the ATO can take. There's 353.10 and 353.15. One of them is access to premises. So they can literally raid your house if they want.
Sounds pretty extreme.
They don't really do that for property investors, unless you're doing something real spicy. That's more for illegal tobacco farms and stuff like that. Usually there's other law enforcement that get them for real crimes. So there's the access to premises, and the other one is access to documents. Common misconception is that ATO's law enforcement have to go get a warrant or a subpoena or something to get information from you. They don't. They have a power to access documents that you hold or other people hold, including banks, and they can access your bank statements.
And that's a 353.
A 353 notice, the ATO will give to your bank and say, I want all the bank accounts for Todd.
Do you know about that as a property investor, or is that quietly happening behind the scenes?
They usually don't tip you off.
Yeah.
They can. There's no tipping off rule.
Okay.
But the banks generally don't have a vested interest in tipping you off.
And the ATO doesn't have to either?
No.
Okay.
They can do covert audits where they can audit you. I've had cases that I've had to defend where the case starts with, here is your audit letter, we've finalised it. Here is your bill and your penalties. And it's like, what?
I found out the other day even the Spanish Inquisition used to give you 30 days, apparently.
Wow, that's very kind of them. The ATO does not. The ATO say, here's your decision. Desk audit, you're done. Particularly at the moment with not property-specific issues, but other issues, you just get a letter that your ABN got cancelled or your tax return's being amended.
Right,
it's not audit.
So if this is happening, no one knows, basically.
Yeah,
Okay.
it can. It's not common.
Okay.
Usually you'll know. Usually they will ask you first.
Oh, okay.
Usually, 99% of the time. If you're being dodgy, you're involved with people who are dodgy and you've been roped into that, they might just check on your stuff and you will never know.
Okay. So
you may have been audited and never know about it.
and you might be getting to this, and maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but this question is more so around like a first home buyer. I want to get the grants. I want to do all this.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's right. The first home buyer stuff.
Yeah, because then if you're like, yeah, no, it's a PPR. Wink, wink. Yeah. And then they're renting it out to a mate and living at home with mum still.
Yeah.
Is there a huge risk for them? Is that the kind of thing that the ATO is really tacking down on? Because like technically they're doing the wrong thing.
It's to be honest, it's more the state revenue officers, because you get a 20k discount on your stamp duty. That's money out their door. They are auditing that quite a lot. If you rent it out, New South Wales at least. I'm from New South Wales originally. You've got to use the rental bond board and everything. They're going to know someone's renting there, so people do it quietly on the side. It can come out years later, and it comes with severe penalties. I have seen it happen. It is more commonly from the state revenue officers because that'll happen first. That's in that first 6 months. You've got to live in it or something like that.
Yep.
ATO don't care about PPR until you're selling it or you're trying to claim deductions. If you're trying to claim deductions and you say it's your home address, they're going to go, what the hell is this?
Okay, so 353 in that situation, not going to happen.
Generally, no, because there is so much data about property that they already have access to. Land title office, rental bond board, most people's bank accounts, electoral register. If someone's registering, power in their name, they can find out about that. They don't have to issue a notice. They can just ask the power company. They'll just tell them because otherwise they'll get a notice anyway. So the ATO has access to a lot of documents, a lot of information. They generally don't need the notices, but if they do, they'll whip it out.
So if someone was to do that, as much as even if they had the power and all that kind of stuff in their own name, it's like the ATO aren't going to be the one looking at them anyway. It's the state revenue that's really missed out.
Yeah, that's what I've seen.
Gotcha.
And I've had like state revenue, and I think in most states, hungry for revenue. Mm-hmm. I've seen some very
especially Victoria.
Especially Victoria. They keep putting new levies and stuff.
I love it.
And then the budget's still down bad, so I don't know how they did that. Let's leave that one out. Politics out of that one. But the state revenue officers want money because they are limited in what they can charge. And this all comes back to the GST deal from 1999. But I don't want to get into that too much. But effectively, they can't charge taxes apart from payroll taxes and duties. So they want to get all the money that they can so they can spend on stuff. And state revenue have essentially all been told, get as much revenue as you can so we can spend it on stuff. And I've seen audits for foreign persons that are technically foreign persons because those rules are quite strict. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. And this isn't first home buyer, but this is state revenue getting a bit mean and nasty. This fellow was an airline pilot and he was a permanent resident, but to not pay the double duty that foreign residents have to pay as a permanent resident, you need to be PR and be in Australia for 200 days of the last 365.
Gotcha.
And it sounds reasonable. When you're departing Australia and coming back, those days don't count.
Okay.
So this guy was a international airline pilot, flying in Japan, mostly Southeast Asia.
Let's see where this is going. Yep.
All those days where he was getting on and off the plane didn't count. And they thought they did. And when he was working with the conveyancer, it's effectively a tick box of like, are you a foreign resident? No, of course not. You might read the list and go, well, I've been here. I live here. And he was flying out constantly, going to New Zealand, everything. And he actually failed it on the purchase day. And it was 3 years later where they got a letter from state revenue saying, we've matched your migration records, like your passport things, when you've enter and leave, and we've determined that you were a foreign resident and you owe another $80,000 in duty.
That's a bit rough.
Yeah. The worst bit is they were at the tail end of all these audits. So law cover that covered the conveyancers and the lawyers that did this, they actually excluded this from their policies. Like the claims were so high. So these guys, like they came to me and they said, can we argue it? I said, well, the evidence is pretty clear. You've got one option. You've got to sue the lawyer. And
was it bad advice?
Well, they didn't get advice. Like the form that they fill out was, have you been in Australia for the last 200 days? Yes, I was, what they thought. But really, it should have said it excludes days where you're flying in and out. And the lawyer should have said, they're an airline pilot. They're going to be flying in and out a bit. Like, really want to check this out.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and state revenue, years later, went back and checked on it. And those people, 80 grand, 90 grand, they had to pay. They had to fork it out, plus penalties and interest. State revenue very unforgiving on penalties and interest as well. I help these people out. And I said, look, I'll give them a call. And I said, look, this was a clearly honest mistake. Like, well, they'll pay the duty, but can we waive the penalties and the interest? And they're much stricter than the ATO in waiving those. We actually got both denied. They said they should have known better. And I said, well, like they relied on a lawyer and the lawyer stuffed it up. And we're going to sue the lawyer for it, the duty and stuff like that. Because if they delayed settlement for 14 days, they would have actually been over 200 days and they wouldn't have had to pay it.
That's insane.
Yeah. So it was, or exchange or something like that. It was real knife edge. Mm-hmm. But you don't know what you don't know, which is why you need the superstar team of advisors that we spoke about before. And you got to pay them when they ask you to pay them.
So the first home buyer that doesn't have the superstars team of, it's basically superstar team around them.
Yep.
That maybe is listening to this now, getting a little bit nervous, thinking, oh, I might have done that.
Well, the first thing is maybe don't rent out your PPR if you're going to claim PPR exemption for stamp duty, because that's called breaking the law and generally not recommended. But if you're going to do it anyway, then be very careful, because state revenue has a lot of data, and retrospectively, that's how all these audits happen. They're going to have a look, most likely. And they're hungry for revenue, 80, 90 grand from a first home buyer. Like that's a bit of a kick in the guts.
That's huge.
If interest rates, like say you bought 3 years ago and then interest rates are back, up now, and you're really tight on cash and state revenue knocks on the door and says, I need 90 grand 3 years ago.
Even need 20, 30 grand for a lot of people. That's huge.
It's enough to put you into bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And that's going to put you back longer than if you just pay the extra 20 grand of duty on buying the bloody property. So be very careful if you're going to run that one, because it's high risk, and in my view, it's low reward.
Harry, we've got a few more questions to run through, but I want to lift the mood because I feel like we've probably just nosedived a couple of people and made them sad. I used to play games all the time on the show. I haven't for a long time, but don't know why. It just felt like the right thing to do with you.
This is a fun podcast. It's a fun topic. Tax is fun.
Yeah. So I've come up with a little game that I call Tax Law or Todd's Law. Some of these laws are actual tax laws around the world. Okay, not Australian tax laws.
Okay, all
so
right.
You'll be forgiven if you get all of them wrong.
Okay, well, that's good.
Some of them are laws that I've made up. You have to guess which one's which. It's only like 5 of them or 6, whatever it is. You ready to play?
All right, let's go. I won't even cheat. I won't look at your screen.
All right. Oh, yeah, you can. Let me turn that computer. All right, beard tax. In 1698, Russia's Peter the Great wasn't a fan of facial hair, so he introduced a beard tax to encourage men to shave.
That's true. Yeah, that was a beard tax.
Correct, that is true. Right side escalator tax. Since 2022, China uses facial recognition surveillance to increase the tax rate of individuals standing on the left-hand side of the escalator in public spaces due to slowing down transport and productivity.
I'm going to say that's not a real one. There is a social credit thing, but I don't know if it interacts with the tax.
That is not real. That is Todd's Law. It really irks me when people stand in front of me on an escalator. I would back that.
Yeah. I'd vote for you, mate.
Hat tax. The British government implemented a hat tax in 1784 with the assumption that wealthier citizens would own hats.
That was true. There was a hat tax.
Correct, that is true. Google tax. France taxed online ads displayed by tech giants like Google and Facebook and is expected to raise up to $29 million a year.
That's true. It upset a lot of people in the OECD when they brought that in.
Dude, you are nailing this.
Yeah. I do like tax trivia. I've got a few for you after this if you want.
Okay, yeah. All right, next one. This is the penultimate question. 5 cat tax. In an aim to stop the spread of wild cats, Thailand introduced a 500 baht per annum for every cat. So for every cat a household owns over 5.
I want to say that's the Todd Law, that one.
And it's a Todd Law as well.
Was that 5 out of 5?
Yeah, well, I've got one last one.
Right,
one last one.
right.
Bribing someone used to be legal in Germany until 2002. These bribes were once tax deductible as long as you named names.
That's true, I think.
That is true.
Yes.
You've nailed all of those. 6 for 6. Well
Yeah.
done.
Oh, thanks, mate.
I feel like we need some kind of sirens or like ding, ding, ding to go off.
Yeah, I should win a prize or something.
Yeah.
My favorite tax, like, sorry, it feels super nerdy, but it's pretty wild, is there was a window tax.
I've heard of this.
Yeah, it was real tax.
Yes.
Because if you're rich, you had windows. So what they did? They brick up the windows.
I've seen this. This is in Britain, isn't it?
Yeah. Britain had a lot of very weird taxes. They had a hearth tax. You had more than one hearth, like fireplace for cooking and stuff.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Then you generally got more money and they'll tax you more. And it was only relatively late in the piece where income was picked as the thing to tax. Because income is kind of unavoidable. If I need 100 grand, if I have to make 100 grand a year to live, I've got to make 100 grand. I can't I can't alienate it. I can't brick up the window. Because they will just brick up the window.
Yeah, or take off the hat or shave your beard.
Shave the beard. There was a moustache tax as well, I believe. I made a TikTok about this ages ago. I was going through all these weird taxes. But they just tried to pick something that was like unavoidable and like a good way to measure disparities in wealth, because people with more windows had more glass, which is quite expensive, more money, and then we can tax them more. But tax avoidance was just too easy. So with physical things like that.
There you go. We should chat about that off air a little bit, because I'm sure you've got quite a few of them. I thoroughly enjoyed making that game. Yeah, it was just good fun.
Yeah, you go down a rabbit hole on Wikipedia on that one. There's a lot of weird stuff there.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did. Yeah. All right, back to the real questions for it. Renovating a PPR.
Yep.
Right. It's not freehold. Sorry, it's tax exempt as far as CGT is concerned. Okay. You renovate it. It's your PPR. You sell it later on. Hooray! Whatever profit you made, you're not giving any of the tax, man. Everyone's pretty clear on this. I think it's pretty widely known.
Yep.
There's a bit of a grey area here, though. What if you do that every year? What if you do it 2 years in a row? What if you do it 10 years in a row? Where's the line between the ATO going, oh, I can see what you're doing there, versus like, no, this was genuinely, we renovated this, our situation changed, whatever, and we're free of tax?
Yeah. I've seen this many times, and people don't like the answer. Let's start number one. Just doing it once. Mm-hmm. Doing it once, relatively low risk, because you've got two kinds of receipts, character of amounts you receive. Income, so if you're a property developer, building property, selling it all the time, it's income that you're earning. And if you have an asset long-term, PPR, or a rental property or piece of land, and then you sell it, capital gain. If it's as one, it's pretty straightforward, capital gain, because capital gains are like once-off events, investment style stuff. PPR exemption is just for capital gains. Okay. You can earn income from your PPR if you do things the wrong way. And one of them is this, where do it once, maybe twice, relatively low risk. I've seen tradies, because tradies are obviously very self-sufficient and can renovate places themselves. They live there for a year, renovate it, sell it. Like, I've seen guys make more doing that than in their job. And they're making, average $200K a year in exempt gains, because they could flip these properties that they live in, and they just move around town and think about your uncle. But in reality, the repetition, the regularity, the way that they were running it, way they were picking properties to buy, unrenovated properties, I'll live there, I'll spend stuff, I'll build it up, here's what I expect to get. It's starting to become a business. And this is real grey area stuff. This is foundational tax problems. Just like we spoke about, they settled on income as the thing to tax. The thing is, like, say you're running a farm, selling apples, make income, and say you sell the farm for $100 million. And if you're in Western Sydney, that'd be a cheap farm. And suddenly the $100 million is no tax on it, because it's capital, it's not income. But when you start saying, well, I'm going to buy lots of farms in the area, and start, holding them and flipping them and getting them ready, getting DAs and getting all sorts of stuff, that's when you start to go, this is more income. This is starting to be a business. Of those two kinds of passive holding, capital gain, active is income, there's actually a middle ground. And it's called a profit-making undertaking or scheme. If you look that up, you will find information about it on the ATO website, and there have been cases. This has been relatively well explored, and it comes up with property. If you buy a property and you take some active steps to make it worth more money to sell, that's when it starts to be your motivation for buying it was profit making. But on the flip side, we only buy investment properties because we want them to go up or we want to earn rental yield. But if you're buying them in a passive way, you get the rental yield and the gain. The property may go up, may go down. But if you buy it strategically, say you buy a piece of land that's unzoned or zoned rural, and then you get it zoned for residential, and it goes up 10x in value, and you can flip it to a developer.
Yep.
If you bought it with the intention to do that, it's likely going to be income. You're not in business, but you're in this middle ground.
Okay, how is intent proven?
With great difficulty. But it can be inferred by your actions. The biggest one in terms of like developing is the DAs. With the example, with the 10 PPRs that you're flipping one every year, for example, the regularity starts to be very telling.
Yeah.
If I'm doing one every year, it's repetition is one of the factors of are you in business?
Yeah, okay.
Because
if you sell a coffee, you're not a cafe. If you sell 1,000 coffees a day, you're a cafe.
That's right. That's right. And if you're selling one property every year, it starts to be that you are starting to become a property developer.
Yeah. Okay.
And the PPR exemption is a CGT exemption. It doesn't cover income. And that grey area stuff will get people. Can I give you another example?
Yeah.
This happened in Sydney quite a bit, probably the last 10 years, is 10 houses in a cul-de-sac, they all get together, sell the property, they all get together, had lots of meetings, leverage the developer for all that they could. They sell it, and then they get a big dirty audit from the ATO saying it's all income. Everybody thought they were selling for tax-free capital gains, but because they took these active steps to group together, to negotiate with the developer, to get as much value as they could from it, they start to run a significant risk.
I didn't know that.
There was a couple of news articles about this.
Okay, yeah.
Years ago now, probably 7 or 8 years ago now. And the Sydney prices obviously went a bit ballistic, which is why the ATO was like, well, there's some cash to grab here.
I do remember this happening more and more, but I don't remember the ATO going, wait a second, we can see the intent is to sell it to a developer, therefore we're taxing you now.
I don't think anyone went to court. I think they all settled before because it's a very difficult one to argue. It's a issue as old as time. Is it income? Is it capital? And in this case, it's exempt if it's capital, and it's fully accessible at 47% if it's income, particularly if you're making $2 or $3 million, which they were.
All right. If I was your client and Bianca and I were flipping, okay, and we renovate, we build a portfolio.
Yeah.
And let's say we've got a 10-year period. Okay. And we're like, oh, look, Harry, we actually are thinking about buying a place to live in twice throughout that 10 years. We're going to renovate it because it's what we do. We renovate properties. Then if we genuinely go, actually, you know what, we need something bigger, we need a different area, we need whatever, and we sell it. If we've done that twice, so one every 5 years, would you say that's relatively safe, or would you say
that's relatively safe?
Okay.
I'd go out on a limb there. Yeah,
now let's double it. Let's say we did it every 2.5 years. Are we pushing it now, or is it still like, nah, that's probably okay?
You're pushing it, but
potentially okay.
Potentially okay. The important bit is the reasons. Okay. If you're doing it to go, well, we renovated this place, we can sell and get a nice liquidity event, and buy something nice, like buy another shitbox and we can renovate.
Yep.
Then that's when it looks like a business. But if you go, look, just had 3 kids, just had triplets, we need a 5-bed house now. The reason that you're selling and moving is important. Whether you renovate the property is irrelevant, like really, because that's just one way to increase the value. It's the regularity and the reasons why you're doing it. If you go, well, I've got to move because I've got a job somewhere else or something like that, then you may need to document that very carefully.
Yep.
And the best documentation to do is at the time. So when you go into those tax reviews, your accountant won't ask you about this sort of thing unless you bring it up.
Yeah. So open up documenting it carefully. What does that look like?
So documenting in real time. So it might be speaking with the accountant or getting some advice, or in serious cases doing stuff like statutory declarations, which you shouldn't do without legal advice because they carry criminal penalties, or deed polls, which are a bit safer, to document why you're doing things and make sure that your tax position is consistent with that. Make sure you're lodging on time as well, because that period of review will come in as a factor. For most people, it'll be 2 years. For some people, it'll be 4 years. So as long as you're lodging on time regularly, if you're trying to claim deductions for your PPR, you've just left a big red flag out there for the ATO.
Obviously very different. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're running a property development business, like renovation, business or capital gain, whatever, keep it very separate. don't live in those houses. Keep a nice clean line if you can.
Mm-hmm.
If things require that, you need to go move into one of the properties that you renovated, that's fine. Document that change of intention. Might be emails with your accountant, might be something in writing with dates. Emails are very powerful.
Okay.
Where you can say, this is the time and date, and can be verified by two parties of here's the conversation that we had. And keeping that documentation is what will protect you. Not having documentation is open season for the ATO.
I feel like that's one of the biggest takeaways so far as far as protection's concerned, because it sounds like it's such a simple thing.
It's so boring, and it's like you wanted me here for like cool, spicy legal stuff, but it's like, yeah, keep some records. It's boring, I know, but if you go into an audit and you don't have any documentation,
you're screwed.
It's your job. It's a self-assessment system.
Yeah.
And if they say, well, $1 million came into your bank account, you can't explain it, they're going to say it's income. But if you go from selling a property that I inherited in Romania, they're going to say, prove it. What property? Where's the contract? Where's the will? Where's whatever? And if you don't have it, you're screwed.
But if you've got it, you've got a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
You're right. It's not the fun, sexy stuff, but most of the time, the most important stuff isn't.
Yeah, that's right. It can be uncomplicated as long as you do it regularly, and your accountant has the foresight to pick these things up, which is why I said they need to have more complex clients. They've got to have had clients with issues. Like even when I worked at the ATO and I was doing audits, I remember this one accountant that I met, and he's like, I haven't seen an ATO officer come into my practice for 20 years. I said, well, that's like strange. You should have got like a call or a desk audit or something like that. Like that's uncommon. And the audit that we did, the guy was not squeaky clean as well. So I was like, well, this is really concerning because no one's even spoken to you for so long. And then when we come in, they're making up new ways of claiming deductions. And we're like, well, where does it say that? Where does it say you can do that? Oh, we just think it's reasonable. I'm like, doesn't say like what you reckon, mate.
I don't
like
think that's how the law works.
It's called the law.
Yeah.
And they were like shocked, and they were like, oh, that's not what we thought. And they kind of went a bit too far. So you want to have an accountant that knows what they can push and what they can't. Because it is a bit of an art form. And if they've dealt with the issues with the ATO, then they're going to understand the art form. If they've dealt with complex clients where they didn't document stuff and then, the husband dies and the accountant and the wife have to figure it out for 12 months. Like those cases come up a lot. And that's where accountants get a lot of their grit and determination about how they deal with really complex stuff. That's the one you want.
I like this, Harry. This is, you've already made me question a few things I'm going to be talking about with Bianca later on. But as far as the CGT and PPR, what I'm hearing is you do it a few times, you're okay. You do it 3 or 4 times in 10 years, you're probably going to be okay.
Probably okay.
You're doing it every year, you're going to be setting some red flags.
Setting some red flags, and there can be legitimate reasons for doing that. And if there are, you need to document those, because 10 years down the track, first of all, I can't remember what I did last week, but second of all, if you're saying now, whenever you say to the ATO, no, I didn't do that for a tax avoidance purpose or a tax evasion purpose, they're going to go, well, of course you're going to say that, mate. So you need to keep documentation at the time of like, no, I spoke to my accountant about this, and they said it probably wasn't a business, or it's still a capital gain because, it was just a lifestyle decision. I wasn't, I was renovating it to be a nice place to live because that's what I do. I like to fix stuff. I'm a tradie or whatever. I renovate properties as my other job. Then that's fine. That can still be a capital gain, but you've got to be very careful and separate them and document it.
Last question, Harry. If someone wants to build a property portfolio, let's say they've got a goal of around $3 million, okay? So not shooting the lights out, but it's still very respectable, okay? Let's just say it's 4 properties, $750,000 each.
Yeah.
Something that you've said on one of your TikToks, and I quite liked this, was around a good professional should show you the options. Instead of just saying, this is the answer, now go do that. It's, here's the options, high risk, low risk, however you want to put it. Can you kind of talk us through a little bit of the options people should be considering if they're wanting to build a portfolio around the same kind of size? Maybe they're on about 200K a year. Maybe they've got one dependent. How does this look in your mind as far as the options are concerned?
Goals oriented is how we've got to structure it. The structure's got to reflect what are they trying to achieve. Because there's the buy price right now, and there's the yield, which we know is reasonably dependable, and then there's the capital growth, which is always a bit scary. Like you've got to speculate on that. So I kind of like to optimize for each of those.
Okay.
And this is where it's tax planning. and you can only plan in advance. You can't plan once you've already done it because you've already done it.
So if someone came to you with this portfolio, you're like, well, you're done.
Well, if someone came to you with this portfolio, moving property around is very expensive. You've got stamp duty and potentially capital gains as well.
Okay.
So moving things around is generally off the table. So when you're buying a property and another property, you should be touching base with your accountant again. It should be fitting into your overall strategy. So in terms of broad options, if I'm buying these 4 properties, 750K each, with a bit of debt, whatever, and I'm optimizing for capital growth, then a trust is almost always going to be the best way. Or personally, in some cases, trusts are generally the first thought should be a trust because you can put all of it there. Say one has a loss, one has a gain. You can offset it there, distribute the income. When the kid's grown up, the dependent, I assume, is a child, then you can distribute some funds to them, and it's a good part of the family wealth building empire. Trusts are really good as the crown jewel, which hold all the assets, whether it be shares in trading companies, property, whatever. That's the standard where usually you'll start, and it's enough cash where it's worth it. Sort of sub, 100, 200K worth of, deposit, it's almost not worth doing a trust because it's complex. It costs more money to do every year. But at this asset level, a trust could be justified. But say these guys were professionals and they had high risk. I say they were lawyers or they're accountants or they're engineers where personal liability is a big factor. Even stronger, I would push for the trust. Okay. Because if they have it personally, then if something really goes wrong, there's assets to grab. And a trust doesn't defeat that. It's all part of structuring to make it, asset protection. So that's a big factor. But say on the alternative, they're buying all these properties and there's going to be massive losses in them, negatively geared. And I hate negative gearing, but that's for another day. Say they're going to be negatively geared because they see enormous capital growth in these properties. And they have a lot of income, 200K of income. Well, it's a good amount of income. And then there's going to be $100,000 of losses. If they're in the trust, they can't offset those losses against their income. And every year they're going to be at a financial detriment until they finally sell those properties. So they're going to have to wear that loss for many years and not be tax efficient with it. But if they bought it personally, then they can use that loss on the interest that they're paying and other expenses and things. So we're optimizing heavy for capital growth. If it's negatively geared, personal is probably the way to do it. Because if it's in a trust, you can't use the losses. The trust is a different entity than you.
Makes sense.
You may still want to go with a trust. For example, if you're a business owner and you can negatively gear in the trust, you've got a company that's a trading company, makes profit, can pay a dividend to the trust and use up those losses. So it can still be efficient and it needs to fit your circumstances. So optimizing for capital growth, trusts are usually the best way, sometimes personal. I don't really talk about self-managed super funds because I'm going to assume these people are 30 and they're not really have that long-term visibility for 30, 40 years. But super funds should be considered as well, particularly if it's very long-term. But the other side is say we're buying, these properties in Perth, for example, hot market, good yields, 6-7%. I've even seen 10% yields that people have gotten on, very cheap prices.
Some of them are insane.
Some of them are insane, and it's still going, which is very puzzling. But say you're buying a lot of high yielding properties, a trust is probably what you want as a base. But the problem with trusts is the income the trust gets, you have to deal with every year. If they're distributing to these people, they'll be paying, I forget the tax rates, to be honest. I probably should know the tax rates. It's like 30% or something. They'll be paying 30% tax, a bit less even, on the income from the trust that goes to them.
Yep.
The alternative is, say they grow their income, they can use a bucket company structure. The trouble with bucket companies and individuals receiving trust distributions is if the trust needs it back to pay for expenses, such as principal, paying down the principal, which is not tax deductible, then there's got to be payments back. From individuals, not a big problem. From trusts back in, it starts to be a bit of a problem. From companies back into trusts, it starts to be a bit of a problem. You've got something called Division 7A loans. You can't just take loans from companies to yourself or trusts without putting it on complying loan agreements, requires interest. And it's really a way to kick it down the road. So the long-term strategy on income is well, are we replacing our income? Or is this going to be our portfolio? If it's going to replace income, trust itself might be fine. Personal might be fine. It's, $3 million of property, we'll get a 5-6% yield. I can't do the maths on that. What's that like? 150 grand, something like that.
Something like that,
yeah. Great. If the goal is replacing income with other income, trust can work. You can be flexible with it each year. Someone goes back to work and it's another 100K or something, then you can direct it to the other partner. Trust is great.
It's kind of sound like the trust's great overall, really.
Trusts are where you start, absolutely.
Unless you're wanting the tax deductions in your own name, if you do go down the negative gearing route.
Yeah.
That's kind of the only real...
Or if you're too poor.
Open that up a little bit.
So if you don't have enough assets, so if you're buying, a cheapy property for, 300 grand, putting 30K in, and it's not going to have significant capital growth.
Hey, I started with a $62,000 property. So I was...
Geez, how old are you, Todd?
That was in 2017. I had to drive for a while to get to it. But
yeah.
Anyway, that's a whole other story.
I'm assuming it's gone up.
It has, yeah.
and maybe in hindsight you go, well, that should have been in the trust. That would have been handy.
And yeah. Actually, I've absolutely, and I'll fully own that. I've absolutely made some mistakes around not putting properties in trust.
The hindsight's 2020, unfortunately. And even at the time, I can't say to you, if I knew that this property was going to go up 5x, and it's like a trust makes sense, just where the costs. It's it's an extra grand a year or so for like a reasonably complex trust, maybe $500 if you can get it done well. Plus setting up the trust costs you a couple of grand usually. And the big hit actually is more land tax. This is the downside of trusts, which is why we don't always default to them every time. If it was perfect, that'd be so easy. We just chuck it in the trust and we're done. But land tax, and it changes per state. But New South Wales, for instance, personally, you get a land tax threshold of like 800 grand or something, and that's land value. Even if you're spending $2 million on the property, it might only have $1 million of land value. Generally, it's around 40% is what I've noticed. You've probably got a better figure than that in mind.
It's roughly around
roughly that.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And obviously, it's changing every state, like you said.
It changes every state.
Victoria's changed it.
Yeah.
But it's still pretty good here in Brisbane where we're shooting right now.
Yeah, it's pretty good in Brisbane. But the big one is WA, because everyone's been very interested in WA and Perth. The trusts actually do get a land tax threshold. So people actually set up multiple trusts, one for each property, because they can save on a lot of land tax. And I do expect that the government will change that in the next sort of 5 years. But it's the state that you're buying in that affects it a bit as well. So New South Wales, I'd say buy your first properties personally, because the land tax exemption is like the threshold is worth about 10 grand a year, which is quite a lot. Compared to having it in a trust with no threshold and paying land tax from zero.
It depends how big your portfolio is as well.
Depends how big your portfolio is. So I'm going to have to say it depends, which I know is a cop-out, but it does depend on your goals and it depends on where the property is.
Kind of one of the reasons I wanted to ask this question. As much as I was hoping for some kind of clear-cut answer, I was pretty confident that wasn't what I was going to get. But
trust is the starting point, and then consider land tax implications and consider personal goals.
And this is exactly what I'm getting at, though, as well, is that I don't want people listening to stuff on YouTube, but this podcast as well, anything, and just going, all right, I've got this little bit of information. I'm going to go do that.
Yeah.
This is about highlighting the importance in actually getting information for your situation. I say it on every episode all the time. This is not financial advice. Please seek independent professional financial advice. But it's really showing right now. I've got an absolute tax specialist, a tax attorney sitting in front of me, and he's still saying so many times, I'm not, what about this situation? But it changes on this situation. It changes. It's like,
if you were paying me, I'd give you the answer though.
It is so situational dependent. That's my point.
It is. And it's like people come to me directly and they say, I want to trust. And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
And,
because I saw it somewhere.
Maybe if I was a better businessman, I'd say, here's your bill. Thank you very much. But really, I go, like, why do you want it? And they go, I want to buy a property. And some people say, I want to buy my PPR. And I'm like, that's dumb because you don't get the CGT exemption if you buy it in the trust. And they're like, oh, thanks. And I lost myself, a few grand of money. And that's fine. I'd rather people make better decisions than, say, you told me on this podcast that I should set up a trust. Because I didn't. I'm not telling you to set up a trust. You need to go and ask your advisor if you should set up a trust and why. And they should be wanting to go into your, it's almost financial planning circumstances. Like, well, what do you want to achieve from this? And the financial planners are actually pretty good at that as the primary trusted advisor on this. The accountants are also very good.
Sorry to jump in there. I've not met a financial planner yet that has been really good around property though. Property seems to...
There's a couple. They've got to be independent.
Yeah.
If not independent...
Otherwise, they'll try and sell you some off-the-plan rubbish.
Yeah, get some off-the-plan rubbish or something. They're independent, meaning they're not getting commissions from either a particular organisation or developer or anything like that. You don't want to pay to be sold to. That's silly. You should pay someone for that advice. And there are some out there. I don't want to endorse anybody in particular, but I might.
Let's chat off air.
Yeah, I'll tell you about some. But starting from the financial perspective, because again, we're here to make money. We don't want to buy property. You actually want to make money. That's just the vehicle to get there. Just like people go, I'm going to start a business. It's the way they're going to make money. They don't really want to start a business.
Yeah. Otherwise, you start a charity.
Start a charity.
Non-for-profit, yeah.
I'd rather just do nothing at home, to be honest. We do it for money. And that's fine and not dirty at all. It's fine. But then it's like, well, what kind of money? Income, capital gains. What do you want to do with it? Are you going to spend it? You're going to grow the portfolio?
And again, this is where the questions start growing.
Yeah. So these are very common questions that you will get, and they should be able to very instinctively take you through it. And they shouldn't say, trust, company. It's what state you're going to buy it in and what are your goals? They're the real questions, and that's going to guide 99% of whether it's a trust or personal or whatever.
Wrapping everything up today, Harry, what's an action step? Someone that's listened to this and thought, okay, this is really up my eyes. We got a few people that are terrified now. Yeah. We got a few people that are like, okay, this is really good. I'm glad I listened to this. I was about to make some of these decisions. And we got a few people going, I'm still not sure what I've clicked on here. And trying to piece everything together. I think there's going to be a big mix here. What's an action step that can help all of them? Something that they can just pull out the headphones right now and put into place.
If this has inspired you in some way to go, well, there's things I don't know, then you don't have to go and Google things and go to Downmore Property Podcast. The most efficient thing for you to do is to ask your advisor. If you don't have an advisor, then the advice is to go get one. And it's not me. For most people, it's not me, and it's not a tax lawyer. I just see the real pointy end of this stuff, and I do some of the basic stuff sometimes. But the accessible advisors are accountants and financial planners, and you may need to shop around, and you're not shopping for the cheapest fee. You're shopping for
the best advice, knowledge,
and the way you can get on with them and the way you can contact them. If you've got you don't want to call them at midnight and say, well, how's negative gearing work again? No, you don't want to do that. But if you're a millennial or a Gen Z and you're doing this sort of stuff, you probably want an advisor like in your age bracket. You don't want to go to the older advisors because they may not understand your goals as well. But those older advisors may actually be better if you're taking on some of those more conservative strategies and have a lot of value to add.
Because they've been doing it for 30 years and they've seen most of it.
Yeah. But you need to know that they're still innovating. So it's a personality thing. The knowledge should be inbuilt.
Yeah.
But you've got to test for that too. You've got to go, well, how does this work? And that's what those questions we went over before. Is if you are making one of these decisions, you need to get advice, because there is no layperson in this country that can understand the tax laws in enough detail unless you spend hours and hours and hours of time, and there is still the risk that you don't know what you don't know. And that's why you pay advisors, including me. But I don't do this every day of the week. I've done this in the very complex end, even the simple end, do sometimes. But most advisors can handle this. And if they can't, find another one.
We've arguably arrived to the most important question of the entire show. Harry Dell, what is your favourite pizza?
Pepperoni.
There's no hesitation there.
No, there's not. My fiance will make fun of me and it's boring pepperoni pizza. And I was like, well, no, the toppings and the seasonings are mixed into the sausage. Like, it's designed for pizza. Okay. It's not just like, here's some beef mince on the pizza and you got to season it. It's already a perfect dried meat, crisps up perfectly, no hesitation.
And you cooking this at home, or are you getting this somewhere special?
Somewhere special. Does Domino's count? No.
No. Domino's is surprisingly a more common answer than you might think.
Yeah, where I am in Brisbane, there isn't great food. So if you're in northwest Brisbane, then please open a really nice restaurant, including pizza. Domino's is there. There's a few others. I complain about Domino's whenever it's below standard. And here's a free pizza voucher. And I haven't used it. I want to get one tonight.
Yeah.
Good suggestion.
Complain about it, but you keep going back. I do the same.
There's another place and it just doesn't quite fit yet. So I actually had pizza yesterday. So
yeah. Pepperoni, of course.
Pepperoni was on it, but it was like a fancy Italian joint. So you can't get just pepperoni. You have to get pepperoni and stuff, which is acceptable.
I had a Vapiano pizza yesterday, which is pretty good. I don't know if you had the Vapiano one. I think I'm saying that right. The box is over on the table over there. Yeah, it's like a restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
And pizza.
Yeah, I've had it in Sydney. Yeah.
Yeah, they're good.
Yeah.
But anyway, man, thank you so much for taking the time out, Harry. This has been a long time been wanting to do this interview. Been watching a lot of your stuff on TikTok. We're going to leave a link to you in the show notes below as well. Make sure you give this guy a like and a follow. But Harry Dell, thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome, mate. It was 6 months in the making, so absolute pleasure.